India, for example, from the very beginning has been saying that, look, the ball is in Pakistan's court, because India's initial targets was terror infrastructure in Pakistan and terror bases in Pakistan. So after that, Pakistan decided to escalate by targeting civilian facilities and military installations in India. So from India's vantage point, the idea was that, look, if you want to de-escalate, then Pakistan has to decide whether it wants to de-escalate or not. So clearly on the ground at the moment, there is an uneasy calm that prevails. And I think it would be, both sides would be hoping that that calm continues. But there have been so many false hopes in the past with Pakistan that I don't think anyone in India in particular believes what Pakistan says. And I think that lack of trust with Pakistan continues to be a big challenge. And I think it will continue to hang over the relationship for the foreseeable future.
Harsh, Parakshit also mentioned a lot of back-channel diplomacy going on between both these two countries, and the next step in this process is security chiefs are going to be having a dialogue on the hotline. What do you think is going to come out of those conversations?
I think, at the moment, the conversations are very tactical in nature, in the sense that the conversations are going to be about ensuring that ceasefire on the border continues, the border areas remain calm, that there is no untoward shelling and untoward use of force and violence along the border areas, which had been the real problem for the people on the border areas. So I think at the moment, the ambition is quite limited, and largely the engagement is going to happen at the level of border security chiefs. As you mentioned, they are called the Director General of Military Operations, and they are going to talk to each other and ensure that the border remains calm. But beyond that, a broader dialogue, I don't think is in the offing at the moment, at least not from the Indian side.
Harsh, to my knowledge, there is no third-party observer who can independently call out ceasefire violations. Is this ceasefire agreement, as it stands, simply too broad in scope and lacking in details and open to interpretation and open to misinterpretation? Is that the problem here?
I think there is some problem that might arise because of that, certainly. But I do think that, in this particular case, for example, here the ceasefire, because India and Pakistan both are used to having ceasefire arrangements along the border. Border has been very volatile, as you know, in the history of India and Pakistan over the last 75 years. And at this, and I think the two sides are used to coming to an understanding where they do a limited ceasefire along the border, where they do not shell each other, where they do not use artillery against each other's border areas. And so there is a template is available on both sides to agree to should they want to move in that direction. And so certainly I think while it is open to it might be open to interpretation, the present understanding. But as we were discussing, if the two security chiefs, the DGMOs, the Director General of Military Operations on both sides, come to an understanding that India and Pakistan are quite capable of holding on to ceasefire. I think the problem arises when there is political pressure, particularly on the Pakistani side, to escalate through the use of proxies,
yes.
that groups, and that creates a problem.
Yes. Harsh, is there any scope for a United Nations implementation force or a ceasefire monitoring contingent, anything along those lines in the disputed areas that can monitor this ceasefire and perhaps act on any violations? Or does it open up a whole can of worms in terms of the sovereignty issues with regard to both of these respective countries, India and Pakistan? Is that a non-starter? UN peacekeeping mission?
I don't think that. I think that's a non-starter, because the two nations had decided long back that they won't have third-party mediation in these conflicts, particularly the UN. India would not like that, and India has consistently said that this is a bilateral matter that and should be resolved bilaterally between both sides, and both sides agreed in the Shimla Agreement in 1972 that this is something that they would want to pursue bilaterally. So I don't think there is any space for UN and UN-like agencies, but certainly, in a sense, what has happened in this particular case is that a number of countries have come and have pushed Pakistan to see the light of the day, and in some ways come to the negotiating table or come to a ceasefire agreement, which, as you say, Indians and Pakistanis are not calling it ceasefire at the moment. It's a mutual bilateral understanding, as they say. But clearly, the international community has been able to convince Pakistan, in this particular case in particular, that escalation dynamic is quite visible. It was visible in the conflict, and it should be avoided. And that has brought, I think, given what you're reporting earlier about the IMF loan, all of those issues that Pakistan was facing has allowed this particular crisis to come to this point where we are talking of a potential of an emerging ceasefire-like arrangement in the region between India and Pakistan.
Yes, and Harsh, you mentioned those economic pressure points and importantly, the Indus Valley Water Treaty, which is still being held in abeyance. At what point does India feel it can loosen those restrictions, which appear to be staying for now, because quite clearly India wants to teach Pakistan a lesson from an economic point of view?
Yes, I think, if you recall, when the crisis started, India started taking a set of calibrated measures, which were diplomatic and economic in nature to begin with. And Indus Waters Treaty, which India had not really touched since its inception, came back to the table, and India had put it on abeyance, underscoring, the seriousness of the crisis that this was. And unfortunately, at that point in time, Pakistan did not realize how serious this could get. But this was certainly one of the markers early on in the conflict that India this time is very serious about the consequences and the costs it wanted to impose on Pakistan. And so I don't think that at this point, India is going to change its mind on many of the measures that it had taken, particularly on Indus Waters. But eventually, if things settle down, I think it might be a signal from India that Pakistan is doing something right. But there have been, again, as I said, there have been so many false starts in the past that I think India would go very slow this time, because India, as I think your correspondent earlier was also suggesting, has now changed its security doctrine dramatically, saying that, look, any act of terrorism would be considered an act of war by India now. And this is being done particularly in light of the dastardly act that happened in Pahalgam, which started this whole crisis. So I do think that this time it's very serious, and it's unlikely that India would go back on a number of measures, including Indus Waters Treaty, that is started off when the crisis emerged. So clearly, these are, from India's vantage point, this is a difficult phase. And as you have also mentioned, the operation that India has started, India is not saying that it has concluded. So in that sense, I think it is an ongoing operation which would involve a number of aspects of this operation. They also continue to be in place.